forward.
The federal government is being called on to scrap the fuel excise in the next budget as petrol prices continue to soar to more record levels. Joining me live now is the Liberal MP, Tim Wilson. Tim, thanks for your time this morning. So do you think the fuel excise should be dropped or cut?
Well, of course, all options will be explored in the lead up to the budget as a context of the fact that petrol prices are continuing to rise as a result of international factors. And so the government's very mindful of the very direct impact it has on Australian hip pockets, because every time anyone goes and fills up at the Bowser now, they're paying a lot for their full petrol tank. And so we've got to be very mindful of the impact that's having flown through. But we've also got to look at the trade-offs associated with that. As somebody mentioned before, there are a lot of roads that need to be repaired across the country, including a lot of national roads. And so we've got to make sure we have the money to rebuild them too.
Yeah, so wearing your economic hat, would it be your preference to just make a slight trim to it? And if so, what kind of difference would that make anyway? I mean, if we're talking a cut of just a cent or a few cents a litre, that's not really going to help people that much, is it?
Wearing my economic hat, the best thing would be to see a lowering of fuel prices. But of course, they're set internationally. They're not something that's within the containment of government because
but you can adjust it.
We can adjust the tax component to it, but that isn't the underwriting factor that leads to the current prices. They're not associated with government decision making. And so that's what we would like to obviously see. But obviously international conflicts have a direct flow through to the price of petrol at the Bowser, and that's why we're so mindful of it. And that any tax adjustment would be, if it were to happen, would not radically change the impact of the Bowser.
It wouldn't. I mean, you're unlikely to cut the whole lot, right? 44 cents a litre. That's unlikely to happen.
Well, the tax is there for a reason. It's there to make sure that we have the money to fund roads for people to drive on so that they have a need to get fuel. It's there to make sure that we can carry the costs of the expectation, quite rightly, that Australians have around driving around their communities. So it's a balancing act. It always has been. There's been adjustments in the past as a result of the Howard government in the early 2000s where you saw a price spike. But these are factors that aren't just temporary. They're potentially here for a while.
The other option is to release more fuel reserves. Does that have more merit in your view?
Well, the point of fuel reserves is to make sure that we have the fuel reserves necessary in a time of crisis. Now, we live in a very uncertain world right now. I think everybody who's lived through the past 2 years will know that, or 2.5 years nearly now, will know that between international conflicts and obviously COVID. And so we've got to make sure that we have fuel reserves in place when we need them. Now, of course, if we were to dilute it and get fuel reserves out, then would be a temporary effect. But if the international price continues to stay where it is, it won't solve the long-term problem.
But isn't the problem on fuel reserve here too that we actually don't have enough as things stand? We're supposed to have 90 days and we've only got 2/3 of that. So aren't we already short on that department?
Well, those levels are set based on OPEC decisions, which date back years and years and years, and aren't necessarily the sole component of deciding what it is that's necessary. But we do have fuel reserves necessary to address defence issues and, of course, a degree of civilian supply that's required. But any push of reserves into the marketplace will only have a temporary dilution effect. International prices is what's driving the current increase in the price for households and at the Bowser, and that's why it won't be a permanent solution. That's why, of course, the long-term solution should be how do we get petrol prices down for everybody?
And it's supermarket items, as we've been reporting this morning, Tim, they're up 20%, which is what, roughly 4 or 5 times inflation. When it comes to those supermarket items, they very rarely go back down again. So is what we're seeing here long-term damage to people's savings?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I'd just say that there's obviously been some inflation. It's been driven by supply chain shortages, of course, labour shortages, and many other factors that are driving economic behaviour. And so what the most important thing you do to get prices down is have a competitive marketplace. And there's no reason to believe that it need be long-term structural with individual price increases, but that's going to be driven down by competition more than anything else.
Tim Wilson, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Let's get some weather.